She had always loved music. Ever since she could remember, the sound of a piano had a way of calming her mind and making her feel alive. But being in the school music class was not easy for her. Unlike some of the other students who could play complicated songs almost immediately, she struggled to even get the basic notes right. Her fingers seemed clumsy on the keys, and sometimes she would get frustrated and hit wrong notes repeatedly. It felt like no matter how hard she tried, she just could not catch up. Her teachers noticed her struggles quickly. They were strict and had high expectations. Some of them even laughed when she made mistakes, thinking it was funny that she could not play like the other students. Every time this happened, she felt a pang of embarrassment and sadness. The laughter of people who were supposed to guide her hurt more than she could explain. She often wondered if she really belonged in the music class. Even though it was hard, she refused to give up. At home, she had an old, slightly out-of-tune piano in the corner of the living room. No one else played it, so it became her secret space. She would spend hours there, slowly practicing each note over and over again. Sometimes her hands would ache, sometimes she would make mistakes 100 times in a row, but she did not stop. She had a feeling deep inside that she could do it, that she could play beautifully if she just kept trying. Her parents noticed how much time she was spending on the piano. They didn't fully understand the music herself, but they could see her passion and her dedication. They encouraged her in quiet ways, sometimes sitting nearby while she practiced, smiling when she got a part right, and gently reminding her to take a short break when she worked too hard. Their support was small, but it kept her going during the toughest days. Despite all her effort at home, the school days were still difficult. Every class felt like a challenge. The other students seemed to learn faster, and the teachers sometimes lost patience with her. They would point out every tiny mistake, often in front of the class. It was embarrassing, and she could feel her confidence slipping. Many times she thought about quitting music entirely, thinking maybe she was not talented enough, but every time she considered giving up, she remembered why she loved music in the first place. She remembered the way her heart would race when she heard a beautiful song, the way she could imagine a story through the piano notes. She knew that giving up would mean losing a part of herself. So she made a promise to herself she would keep trying. No matter what anyone said, one day during a music class, her teacher announced that they would be learning a very difficult piano piece. It was known in the school as one of the hardest compositions to master. Some of the students looked worried. Others looked excited to show their skills. She felt a mix of fear and curiosity. She knew that this was going to be a real test, maybe the hardest one she had faced yet. But she also felt a spark of determination. This could be her chance to prove to herself, and maybe even to her teachers, that she was capable of more than anyone expected. That evening, she went home and sat at her piano. She looked at the sheet music and felt a little overwhelmed. The notes were complicated, the rhythms were fast, and it looked impossible to play at first glance. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she had learned hard songs before, even if it took extra time. Slowly, she began to play, one hand at a time. When she made mistakes, she didn't stop. She would go back and try again. She would repeat the same part 100 times if she needed to. Every day after school, she practiced. Every day she pushed herself a little further, until her fingers started to feel more confident on the keys. Her parents noticed that she was more focused than ever. They didn't say much, but they left her alone in the living room, letting her practice in peace. They could see that she was working hard, and they were proud of her dedication. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, they would hear the notes floating through the house, and it made them smile. At school, the teasing continued. Some teachers still laughed at her mistakes, and some classmates whispered to each other, thinking she would never be able to play the difficult piece. But she didn't care as much anymore. She knew that their opinions did not define her. What mattered was that she kept learning, kept practicing, and kept believing in herself. By the end of the first month practicing the piece, she could play small sections of it without stopping. She still made mistakes occasionally, but she could feel improvement with every practice session. The difficult music that once seemed impossible was slowly starting to make sense. Each day she felt a little more confident. Each day, she felt a little closer to achieving something she never thought she could. Even though no one at school had yet noticed her progress, she knew that her hard work was paying off. She felt stronger inside, more determined, and more connected to her music than ever. She realized that the path to success was not about how quickly she could learn, but about the courage to keep going, no matter how many times she failed. By the end of this first part of her journey, she was no longer just a student struggling to keep up. She had become a fighter, someone who refused to let judgment or doubt stop her. The hard piano piece that once seemed like an impossible mountain was slowly turning into a challenge she was ready to conquer. And deep down, she knew that her moment to shine was coming closer every day. After weeks of practice, she was beginning to understand the difficult piano piece. At first, it felt like a wall too high to climb. The notes were fast, the rhythms tricky, and the changes in tone demanding. But every evening, she would sit at the piano, take a deep breath, and start again. She knew that this piece was not just another assignment, it was a challenge that would test her patience, skill, and determination. The more she practiced, the more she noticed her own progress. Small sections of the music that once felt impossible now seemed familiar. She could play a few measures without stopping, and her fingers moved with slightly more confidence than before. Every time she mastered a new part, she felt a little spark of joy. It was proof that her hard work was not wasted. Yet, the journey was far from easy. She often stumbled over long stretches of notes, and sometimes her hands would tire from the repeated practice. Frustration would build, and she would slump back in the piano bench, feeling exhausted and defeated. But something inside her refused to give up. She reminded herself that every great pianist had faced challenges like this. Talent alone was not enough. Persistence was what made the difference. Her teachers, however, were not kind observers of her effort. During class, they would watch as she attempted to play the piece, pointing out mistakes sharply and sometimes even shaking their heads in disappointment. Their reactions stung, and at times she felt like they would never believe in her abilities. Some classmates whispered to each other, laughing quietly, thinking she would never manage to play it correctly. It would have been easy to let their words discourage her, but she did not. She decided that proving herself was not about impressing anyone else, it was about challenging herself and showing that she could rise above doubt. At home, she created a new routine. She divided the piece into smaller sections, focusing on one part at a time. She played slowly, making sure every note was accurate. If she made a mistake, she would pause, figure out where she went wrong, and start again. This methodical approach helped her understand the music better. She realized that mastering the piece was not just about playing fast or perfectly, it was about feeling the music, letting it flow through her, and connecting with it emotionally. Some evenings were harder than others. There were moments when she felt like giving up, when her hands ached and her mind felt tired. She would sit back looking at the sheet music and wonder if she was making any progress at all. But she always remembered why she loved the piano in the first place. She remembered the joy of hearing a beautiful song and the thrill of creating something with her own hands. That love for music kept her going, even on the toughest days. As she continued to practice, she started experimenting with the music. She added her own touches, subtle changes in rhythm, slight pauses where she felt the emotion demanded it, and a gentleness in her playing that made the piece feel alive. It was no longer just notes on a page, it was her own story. This personal connection made the music flow more naturally, and slowly, she began to feel more confident with the challenging parts. One day, while practicing a particularly difficult section, she realized that she could play it almost flawlessly. Her fingers moved quickly and smoothly across the keys, and the notes sounded beautiful and clear. She felt a rush of excitement. This was the moment she had been working toward for weeks. The feeling of accomplishment gave her energy, and she knew that the hard work had been worth it. Even though she was making progress, she was aware that the real test would come in front of her teachers and classmates. She imagined the performance day in her mind, feeling nervous but also determined. She wanted to show them what she was capable of, not to prove them wrong, but to show herself that she could overcome the obstacles that once seemed impossible. her parents continued to support her quietly. They never pressured her or asked for perfection. They simply noticed the effort she put into practicing and encouraged her with small gestures, a smile, a cup of tea while she worked, or listening to her play for a few minutes before leaving her to practice alone. Their support created a safe space where she could focus on her music and grow at her own pace. As the days passed, she noticed a change in herself. She was more patient, more disciplined, and more determined than ever before. The challenge that had seemed impossible at first was slowly becoming something she could conquer. Her confidence grew with each practice session, and she started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could play the entire piece in front of others without failing. At school, some classmates began to notice the change too. A few whispered to each other, surprised that she was improving so much. Even some teachers started to acknowledge that she was working harder than anyone had expected. It wasn't public praise, but it was enough to remind her that effort and dedication were noticed, even if quietly. By the end of this part of her journey, she had not yet performed the piece in front of her class, but she was ready. She knew that the path ahead would still be challenging. There would be nerves, mistakes, and doubts when the day came. But she also knew that she had done the work to face it. She had turned her fear into determination, her frustration into practice, and her dreams into reality, one note at a time. This was the moment where preparation met courage. She had faced her doubts, ignored the laughter, and devoted herself to the music she loved. Now, she could almost feel the moment approaching when she would sit at the piano in front of everyone and reveal, not just the notes she had learned, but the talent she had nurtured with persistence, patience, and heart. Even though she had made significant progress, not every day was easy. Some mornings she would wake up feeling anxious, worrying if she was really ready for the difficult piano piece. The thought of playing in front of her teachers and classmates made her stomach twist with nerves. She had practiced for weeks, yet self-doubt crept in like a shadow, whispering that maybe she still wasn't good enough. She tried to push these thoughts aside. She reminded herself of all the effort she had put in, the hours she had spent practicing, the times she had repeated the same section over and over until her fingers ached. She remembered that talent alone was not enough. Determination and persistence mattered more. Still, the fear of failing in front of everyone was powerful, and it made her feel small. At school, things were not any easier. Some of her classmates would casually mention how difficult the piece was, as if to remind her that it was probably too hard for her. A few even joked quietly that she would never be able to play it correctly. Her teachers continued to be strict, pointing out mistakes without much encouragement. These comments sometimes made her want to hide and give up, but she refused. She reminded herself that she was practicing not for anyone else, but for herself. She began to focus more on understanding the music, not just playing the notes correctly. She listened carefully to recordings of professional pianists performing the same piece, noticing how they added emotion to every note. She tried to mimic their expressions and dynamics, but in her own way. Slowly, she started to feel the music, to let it guide her hands and her heart. This connection to the music gave her a new sense of confidence. It was no longer about proving anyone wrong. It was about expressing herself fully through the piano. Her practice sessions became more deliberate. She broke the piece into smaller, manageable sections, focusing on the parts that still troubled her. If a certain measure refused to sound right, she would stop, figure out what was wrong, and start again. She experimented with tempo and touch, learning how to bring out the feelings hidden in the music. Each day, her playing became more fluid, more expressive, more like a story she was telling rather than a list of notes to follow. Evenings at home became sacred moments. She would sit at the piano, close her eyes, and imagine herself performing in front of her classmates. Sometimes she would play slowly, focusing on accuracy. Other times, she would play as if she were performing on a stage, letting her emotions flow freely through every note. She realized that the music was not just something to practice, it was something she loved deeply. Something that reflected who she was inside. Despite this progress, nerves were always present. On some days, she felt her hands shake as she approached the piano. She worried that when the moment came, she would freeze or make a mistake. But she also knew that these fears were normal. Every great musician had felt them at some point. The key was not to let fear stop her from trying. She reminded herself of how far she had come and how much she had already accomplished. Her parents continued to support her quietly. They would sometimes sit nearby while she practiced, watching her fingers move across the keys. They never gave unsolicited advice, never pushed her too hard. They simply offered their presence and encouragement. Sometimes a gentle word of praise or a smile when she played well was enough to lift her spirits and renew her determination. Slowly, she began to notice the changes in herself. She was becoming more patient, more disciplined, and more confident. She had learned to manage her frustration, to push through difficulties, and to focus on what she could control rather than worrying about what others thought. This inner strength was as important as her piano skills. She realized that performing the piece perfectly was not the ultimate goal, the journey itself, and the courage she found within herself were what truly mattered. At school, some of her classmates started to notice her progress. They would watch quietly as she practiced, surprised at how much she had improved. Even some teachers began to acknowledge her effort, though their words were still cautious. Their recognition was small, but it reminded her that dedication and hard work do not go unnoticed, even if it takes time. With each practice session, she felt more ready for the challenge. She imagined the day when she would sit in front of her teachers and classmates and play the piece from beginning to end. She pictured the music flowing through her fingers, each note expressing the dedication, struggle, and love for music that had carried her this far. The thought made her heart race, but it also filled her with excitement. She knew that this was her chance to show not just her technical skill, but her passion and perseverance. As the day of the class performance approached, her anticipation grew. She was nervous, yes, but she also felt a quiet confidence. She had practiced relentlessly, learned to manage her fear, and connected with the music in a way that made it uniquely hers. She understood that mistakes might happen, and that was okay. What mattered was that she was ready to give her best, to play with all her heart, and to share the music she loved with others. By the end of this stage of her journey, she was not the same student who had struggled so much in the beginning. She had grown stronger, more focused, and more determined. She had learned that talent alone is not enough to achieve success. Hard work, patience, and belief in oneself are equally important. She was ready to face the final step, performing the piece in front of everyone, and finally revealing the talent that had been quietly growing all along. The day of the class performance finally arrived. She woke up early, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves swirling inside her. Her hands felt clammy and her heart beat faster than usual. She kept telling herself that she was ready, that all the hours of practice had prepared her for this moment. But still, a quiet fear lingered. What if she made a mistake in front of everyone? At school, the classroom was unusually quiet. Students and teachers gathered to watch the performances, and the air was filled with anticipation. She could hear the faint sound of other students playing their pieces, some confident, some shaky. When it was her turn, she took a deep breath, her fingers lightly touching the keys of the piano. She could feel every eye on her, every teacher silently waiting to see what she would do. At first, her hands trembled slightly. She hesitated for a brief moment, remembering all the times she had practiced and the struggles she had overcome. Then slowly she let the music guide her. The first notes came out soft and clear, almost like a whisper, but with each measure, her confidence grew. Her fingers moved smoothly across the keys, and the music started to flow naturally, as if it had been inside her all along, waiting to be released. As she continued to play, something amazing happened. The nervousness that had been holding her back melted away, replaced by a deep connection to the music. She was no longer thinking about making mistakes or what her teachers would say. She was simply living in the music, letting every note express her emotions, her struggle, and her determination. Every pause, every crescendo, every soft note carried the story of her journey, from the clumsy beginnings to the hours of practice she had devoted in secret. The classroom fell silent. Even the students who had once whispered and laughed were now watching, their eyes wide in amazement. The teachers, who had doubted her, looked on with surprise. their previous skepticism replaced by genuine admiration. The piece, once considered impossible for her, flowed beautifully from her hands. She added subtle touches, small pauses, and gentle dynamics that made the music feel alive, full of heart and emotion. She could feel the energy of the room changing. The doubts of the past, the teasing from classmates, and even her own fears seemed to vanish. She was in control of the music, and through it she was expressing herself in a way that words could never capture. Every note told a story of persistence, courage, and love for the piano. She realized that this moment was not just about performing. It was about showing the result of all her hard work and belief in herself. When the final note sounded, the room remained quiet for a brief moment. Then slowly applause began. It started as a few hesitant claps, but soon it grew louder and stronger. Her classmates cheered, and even the teachers could not hide their amazement. She had done it. She had played the difficult piece perfectly, and more importantly, she had done it with heart, soul, and passion. Tears filled her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, pride, and joy. She had faced the hardest challenge of her life and emerged victorious. The laughter and mockery of the past felt distant now, replaced by the recognition of her talent and the understanding of her dedication. She realized that her journey, with all its struggles and setbacks, had led her to this unforgettable moment. After the performance, her teachers approached her. They admitted, with smiles and surprise, that they had underestimated her. Some even confessed that they had expected her to fail, yet she had proven them wrong with grace and determination. Her classmates surrounded her, congratulating her and praising her beautiful playing. It was a moment of triumph that she would never forget. A moment that validated every hour of practice, every tear, and every doubt she had faced along the way. But more than the applause and recognition, she felt a deeper satisfaction. She knew that the true reward was not in proving others wrong, it was in proving to herself that she could rise above challenges, that she could work hard, persevere, and achieve something that once seemed impossible. She had discovered her own strength, her own resilience, and her own unique voice through the piano. That day marked a turning point. She realized that obstacles, criticism, and doubts were not meant to stop her. They were meant to teach her, to push her, and to help her grow. The hard piano piece that had once terrified her had become a symbol of her determination and courage. She had learned that persistence, self-belief, and a love for what she does are more powerful than any doubt or fear. As she left the classroom, she felt a sense of pride and confidence she had never experienced before. She knew that there would be other challenges ahead, other fears to face, but she also knew that she now had the strength and perseverance to overcome them. She had faced her biggest challenge yet, and she had done it with heart, skill, and courage. Her journey was far from over. But this performance had proven something very important, not just to her teachers and classmates, but to herself. She had the power to turn struggle into triumph, fear into determination, and practice into excellence. And that knowledge, more than anything else, was a gift that would stay with her forever. After her unforgettable performance, life at school felt different. Her classmates, who had once whispered and laughed, now looked at her with admiration. They no longer saw her as the struggling student who couldn't keep up. They saw someone who had faced a seemingly impossible challenge and conquered it with determination and heart. Even the teachers who had doubted her abilities began to treat her with newfound respect. Their tone was softer, their comments more encouraging, and for the first time, she felt truly recognized for her talent and effort. The applause from the performance continued to echo in her mind for days. She remembered the way the room had gone quiet as she played, the way everyone's attention had been completely on her, and the overwhelming feeling of pride that filled her chest. That day had shown her that hard work, persistence, and belief in oneself could achieve remarkable things. She realized that the recognition from others was rewarding, but it was the personal satisfaction, the proof that she had never given up, that mattered most. Her journey had taught her many important lessons. She understood now that struggle was not a sign of weakness. Struggle was part of the process, a necessary step on the path to growth. Every mistake she had made while practicing, every note she had stumbled on had been a lesson. Those challenges had taught her patience, focus, and resilience. She had learned to embrace difficulty rather than fear it, knowing that each challenge was an opportunity to improve, but she also realized that her fear and self-doubt had been powerful teachers. They had forced her to push herself harder, to prepare more diligently, and to connect with her music on a deeper level. Rather than letting fear control her, she had learned to use it as motivation, letting it guide her toward preparation, practice, and improvement. That insight would stay with her forever. Not just in music, but in everything she chose to pursue. Her family was incredibly proud of her. They had seen her struggle in secret, had watched her dedication, and had supported her quietly every step of the way. They celebrated her success, not with grand gestures, but with warm smiles, gentle encouragement, and heartfelt words of praise. They reminded her that the real reward was her own growth, the development of her skill, and the courage she had shown throughout the journey back at school. Her classmates started to approach her differently. Some asked for advice on practicing difficult pieces. Others shared their own struggles, inspired by her example. She discovered that her journey had not only changed her, but it had also motivated others to believe in themselves and keep working toward their goals. It was a humbling and beautiful experience, showing her that determination and perseverance can inspire more than just personal success. They can ripple out and touch the lives of others. Her teachers, too, began to change the way they approached students. They seemed more patient and understanding, perhaps realizing that every student learns differently and that true talent is not always immediately visible. Their recognition of her effort made her feel valued, and it also encouraged her to continue learning and improving without fear of judgment. She felt that the environment around her had shifted, and it reminded her that persistence can change not only personal outcomes but also the way others perceive you, even outside school. Her experience stayed with her. Whenever she faced a difficult challenge, she would remember the hard piano piece, the long hours of practice, and the nerves she had felt before performing. She would remember how she had overcome fear, doubt, and discouragement. That memory became a source of strength, reminding her that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. Every new challenge, no matter how intimidating, felt a little less impossible because she had proven to herself what she could achieve with patience, determination, and passion. She also discovered a deeper love for the piano. It was no longer just an instrument she practiced on. It had become a companion, a source of joy, and a way to express herself. Every time she played, she could feel the music flowing through her fingers, telling stories that words could never capture. That connection, she realized, was more valuable than any praise, any applause, or any recognition from others. The piano had taught her discipline, patience, resilience, and self-belief, lessons she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Looking back, she understood that her journey was not just about mastering a difficult piano piece. It was about discovering her own strength, learning to face challenges head-on, and realizing that perseverance can turn fear into accomplishment. She had been mocked, underestimated, and doubted, but she had never let those things define her. Instead, she had chosen to work quietly, practice relentlessly, and believe in herself. That choice had made all the difference. The experience also gave her hope for the future. She knew that life would present many more challenges, some bigger and scarier than a piano piece. But she now had confidence in her ability to face them. She had learned that setbacks and failures were not the end. They were opportunities to grow stronger and to prove to herself that she could achieve what once seemed impossible. She carried that lesson into every part of her life, approaching new tasks with patience, focus, and determination. In the end, her story became more than just a school performance. It became a story of courage, perseverance, and the power of believing in oneself. She had started as a student who struggled, who was laughed at, and who doubted her own abilities. By the end, she had become someone who inspired others, overcame obstacles, and discovered the true meaning of success, not through the opinions of others, but through the courage to keep going, the commitment to practice, and the love for what she did. She learned that talent alone is not enough. Success comes to those who are willing to work, to endure hardships, and to never give up, no matter how hard the path may seem. And most importantly, she learned that self-belief and determination can transform not only your abilities but also the way you see yourself and the way the world sees you. From that day forward, she continued to play the piano with joy and confidence. Each note reminded her of the journey she had taken, the obstacles she had overcome, and the strength she had discovered within herself. And every time she played, she carried the quiet but powerful lesson that persistence, courage, and love for what you do can turn even the hardest challenges into the most unforgettable victories.